Hey, it's Corey, and today we're going to talk about some things that you can do to improve your playing without actually picking up a uke. There have been many times in my life that I have been unable to actually use the physical instrument that I want to practice with. Whether that's my voice or a uke or the piano or a guitar, sometimes there are limitations outside of our control. Sometimes that means it's too late to practice and you don't want to make that noise, or sometimes it's a physical limitation. For instance, I recently jammed my finger in a door really hard, and my finger was so swollen that I could not actually make chord shapes on the uke, so I had to take like a week off for it to heal. There's lots of reasons why you might not actually be able to physically play, but that doesn't mean you can't practice. The first thing that should be known is why it's important to do any of these types of practices, and even if you are completely able to either space, time, or whatever, pick up an instrument and practice actual playing, I'd highly recommend incorporating some of these practice things into your regular routine because they are just as important as actually playing an instrument. And that's because the mental work that goes into your playing is 100% just as important as the actual physical playing. Most of music, in my experience, is a head game. You can practice something as much as you possibly can to be as prepared as you possibly can, but if your head is not in it, you will not have the performance that you're wanting. And that has happened to me multiple times where sometimes it's anxieties, sometimes it's, again, some kind of limiter that is an external thing. But if your head's not in it, it's going to be much harder for you to accomplish whatever goal you set forth with your practice, or if it's even a performance too. A big part of this is because when we're playing music, you're thinking on multiple levels of reading. So that could be you're looking at lyrics, well, you're also looking at rhythm, and then you're also looking at harmonies, but you're also thinking about what you should do with your physical body, so that's another layer. Then you're also trying to make sure you're breathing at the same time, and at the same time as that, you're trying to make an actual good sound. And then you're thinking about certain performance techniques, and then that's not even considering if you're trying to emote or add some kind of performance layer that's a visual representation in addition to what you're doing physically playing. As you can see, there gets to be a lot you have to think about. So thinking about some of these other elements and adding them to your practice, like everything else, practice makes permanent. So the more you kind of practice the mental thinking of what goes into music, the easier it'll be for you to play and then eventually combine that physical playing with the mental thinking. So let's get into it. The first thing I'm going to talk about is song study. Song study is so important, and it's the number one thing you can do to practice without actually having to pick up an instrument. There's various things that can go into song study. Some examples include practicing your lyrics, writing them out on a separate piece of paper. There's going to be a huge connection difference between whether you're just printing out the lyrics online or looking on your screen of your ability to actually memorize and understand those lyrics versus when you're writing them out yourself and really thinking about what you're writing. So that can be writing them down in a notebook. This also helps with memorization, and the better you know a song, the easier it's going to be to play. I know lots of people like to talk about multitasking, but your brain doesn't actually multitask very well. It is really good at doing multiple things subparly at the same time, but if you're wanting to make those better, you're going to have to practice those individual elements and then slowly incorporate doing multiple things at once. You can also practice phrasing with song study, kind of similar to the lyrics. If you're writing out all your lyrics, go through and make notations of where there's line stops. What are they doing in the original version that adds that extra pop? If you don't know standard notation, this could be an opportunity for you to put in, ooh, big pause here, short pause here. And there are little shorthand notes that we do use within standard notation that can help with that. For instance, if you know you have to take a breath between these two words, you can put a little apostrophe there. That's typically the note that's used for a breath within music. If there's a section where you really want to make sure you're holding all the way through and you don't want a gap, you can put an arrow. Those are just two examples, but really anything shorthand, as long as you know what that means, is fine. I would strongly recommend having a little key so that way you're not using different symbols and notations between different songs, so it's nice and consistent. You can also analyze the form in this way. If you're using any song sheets that I have on my Patreon, I organize them out by a basic form structure where it's basically just bridge, verse, chorus, etc. Intro, outro, but even kind of having it just segmented like that is really helpful. If you're looking up just standard lyrics, typically you're not going to see them mapped out that way. However, if you do map them out, it's going to be a lot easier because you're going to find that your verses have a lot of repetition between them. Your choruses are going to have a lot of repetition, and then also your bridges often, and this is really just talking about pop music form, your bridges are often going to harken back to your chorus, but be slightly different enough from your verse so it's a good gap, because the bridge often falls between two choruses. So think about, in terms of form, how you can use that to influence your practice. If you go through and do song study and realize that there's all these repetitive little parts, you can practice those little parts, and that's going to make your actual playing time a lot less and more efficient. Doing research about your song is also a form of song study. Looking up historical covers, looking up history about the recording history, if it's won any awards, what has made this song really worthwhile to a lot of other people? Is it slightly more obscure? Is it incredibly popular? Is it even the original version of the song? There's lots of times where people are quite shocked that the version they like, the cover that they like of a song, is not actually the original version. What's the difference between the two? What different performance practice elements, meaning what different performers do, can make a song different, better, worse, so on. After spending a decent amount of time with your song and you knowing it like the back of your hand, then you can look at actually starting to practice and look at different musical elements within the song. The elements of music are the way in which we categorize different musical things. So for instance, harmony is an element of music, rhythm, form, expressive elements, melody. These are all different ways that we kind of put smaller ideas of music into these larger buckets to help organize, so we have a shared musical language that we can talk about. It's really important to do this because all songs have multiple elements of music in them in order for the song to work. You can't have a song that just uses melody, because for it to be melody, you're using harmony, and even if it's a single line of melody, it has implied harmony. So anytime you're approaching a song, think about what elements of music are present in the song, and that's a great starting place for you to dig a little bit deeper. If you have a firm understanding of what the rhythm is for the song, then practice some of those rhythms. What repetitive rhythms are happening? The rhythm can happen in a melody line, it can happen in an accompaniment, it can happen in a bass line, it can exist anywhere. Try clapping them out, try tapping them, try even writing it out if you know the standard notation for counting. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of being able to practice without actually picking up an instrument is visualization and blind practice. There have been some really interesting studies that talk about the importance of visualization and how it often ends up being just as beneficial and effective with your practice than sitting down and playing for an hour. What I mean by visualization is mapping out visually in your head what you're doing either with your body, your posture, your hands, what you're thinking about at the time. This can be done where you're just thinking and just kind of sitting there, or you can also write it out really detailed. There have been many times where I've done this with a couple measures of music. I often try to pick out a few elements of music, visualize them, see what I'm doing to actually hit on those different elements, and then really focusing. And then when it comes time for actual playing, I have a really detailed guided map. But by the time I actually start playing, I've already done so much lead work on just being able to figure out what I'm supposed to play that often the playing is a lot easier than it would have been if I had just dove into the playing right away. You can also do this by visualizing your hand positions. You can do this by visualizing where your fingers are moving to during transitions, specifically for between different chords. You can think about visualization in terms of the form of the music and the lyrics as well. You know, close your lyric sheet and try to write them out for what you remember. You're going to be able to play the music better if it's memorized in most cases. Oftentimes when people have music in front of them and they're playing, they should still know it well enough that it is practically memorized, or they may be at a place where they can play really efficiently off of a short amount of practice time and they're just using that like song sheet as some guided parts or notes so that they know what to do. That's typically where I'm at when I do tutorials and song sheets. I don't know the songs so well that I have them memorized and I can do it without the song sheet. However, I do know it well enough that I'm just kind of glancing at it, mainly to not mess up on my lyrics because I get really, really nervous when I play in front of a camera. Even after hundreds of these videos, I still get nervous about it. So I have a different kind of way in which I practice when I'm in front of a live audience versus when I'm getting recorded. But that also is the difference between prepping very specifically for a song and being able to play it well enough that I can teach it. You can also do this with flashcards. That's kind of part of a visualization process where I think one way that you could do this with either lines and spaces on tab or frets, or you could map out your fretboard with different chord charts, but take away the name and try to identify them just based on the positioning. You'd be kind of surprised how the moment you take away the name of the chord, you can really forget what that positioning is. So that's another great way that you can work on this visualization, because when you take away one of those little bits, you have to take that information from somewhere, and that's your head typically in your mind. So that's where the visualization comes in there. For the blind practice, that can be when you close your eyes and you try to transition between the different chords without looking. Listening to yourself is also a form of practice. That doesn't mean you just listen and then you cringe the whole time because you don't want to hear yourself play or sing. It means you're listening, you have a little notebook next to you, or you have your song sheet next to you, and you're making notes of when you made a mistake, when you did good things. Praise yourself when you do good things. And then also areas that maybe you didn't meet your goal of, oh, I was gonna have a breath here. If you didn't take the breath, circle it, highlight it, make note of it, and then do a really focused practice on that section. At the end of the day, practice makes permanent. It does not make perfect. Only perfect practice makes perfect. If you have any questions about any of these things, or you'd like links to resources or anything like that, comment down below, give a like to the video. I try to get to all the comments I can, but ultimately, I just want you playing the best you can. So I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.